Another safety implement was added in 1964 after a racer died after striking his head on a guardrail during a race from the window. So they didn't really mandate the nets for another 7 years after that. But in 1970, Richard Petty's grinding rollover crash, he actually had his helmet and his left arm were hanging out of the window and struck the pavement several times. So it wasn't until then that they actually started implementing and using the window net in NASCAR. But in conclusion, you can see that NASCAR develops a lot of safety requirements, but unfortunately it's only after incidents have already happened. Can't fix it until you know there's a problem. But that's pretty much what I got for you guys today. Thank you. Hello, my name is Keith Lee, and today I'll be talking about the evolution of safety equipment in NASCAR. The first thing I want to talk about is the first helmet used by NASCAR. The driver's design was called the Cornwell. Basically, it looked like a hard hat attached over ears and a chin with a leather strap. The early helmets were like flower pots on the head, some of the racers said. But by 1957, a California company named Bell began manufacturing of the open-face racing helmets and for law enforcement as well. But they didn't use the first full-face helmet until 1968 in the Indy 500. But with all that, none of this stuff was ever mandatory. Then the first U.S. patent for the safety belt was issued in 1885, but they were considered optional items by the manufacturer until 1963. In the early 1960s, shoulder straps were added, but many drivers just resisted the change. They didn't like it. But some of them did use the 5-point harness, which had a strap that came between the legs to keep drivers from submarining on head-on collisions. But a lot of this stuff didn't really become mandatory until 2001 in Daytona, where Dale Earnhardt lost his life. It wasn't until 1952 that NASCAR's rule books required the roll bar that went from the doorstop to the roof of the car and kept the roof from caving in the event of a rollover. But that eventually led to teams building in the whole cage on the frame before the vehicles were even assembled. And the actual roll cage design started in 1960 by two guys from the Ford factory team, and they began designing roll cages and then adding them to the bodywork. A lot of teams were using fuel batteries, fuel cells, but there was a downfall to that. In the crash or a wreck or upside down, they would leak or bust, rupture, catch on fire. So not until 1964, most teams used welded metal fuel tanks, but those ruptured in hard crashes. Let's see. Well, after those incidents, they came up with another design for the fuel cell. It was reinforced welded metal box, but it had a rubber bladder on the inside with foam. So just in case of a flip or upside down, there's no potential of ignition or leaking or anything like that. Most of the time when NASCAR really first started, a lot of the drivers just wore jeans and t-shirts and stuff like that, nothing too protective. But once drivers started getting in wrecks and getting burnt really bad or dying in fires, DuPont began developing a fire retardant material called Nomex in the early 60s. And by 1966, drivers like Walt Hanskin, Maxon Gregory, Marvin Pancho, Bill Tullis were testing the experimental Nomex uniforms because a lot of the teams were given this as a test. But it stuck, and a lot of drivers liked it, so it ended up being the norm. After that accident where Robert Fireball Wallace got burnt up and stuff like that, NASCAR tried to implement a secondary fire extinguisher. And the primary one would be held up in the cockpit at all times, but there's also a secondary cylinder that's heat activated that's over by the fuel cell, just in case it was ignited. And that became mandatory as well. Another safety advancement with the tires. At first, NASCAR, they were using truck tires because they can withstand the hard turns and the high speeds and the heat. But Goodyear started developing a tire that had a safety liner. So in instances of a blowout, the tire actually stays inflated in the inner liner.